The U.S. Supreme Court hands down one of its most anticipated rulings of the year, upholding birthright citizenship.
It is a big blow to President Trump, who signed an executive order to restrict it. 3 conservative justices joined 3 liberals to leave in place the understanding that anyone born in the U.S. is a citizen, even if their parents are not. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in his majority opinion, quote, "The framers of the 14th Amendment extended that promise to every freeborn person in this land. We keep that promise today." 3 conservative justices, Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, and Samuel Alito, dissented, with Alito writing that the court made, quote, "a serious mistake." Now tonight, community leaders across southern Nevada are reacting to the Supreme Court's decision to uphold birthright citizenship.
Fox 5's Carla Salinas joined us live in studio with those details. Carla.
Yeah, just hours after the Supreme Court's decision, immigrant advocates here in Las Vegas gathered to discuss what they say the ruling means for families across Nevada.
Maria Peña has waited anxiously for months to learn about the fate of birthright citizenship.
It is a harsh reality that we're living through right now.
She's a teacher at Desert Pines High School, an immigrant from Mexico, and the mother of a daughter born in the U.S. while Peña's own status was still changing.
Just thinking that a decision could be backtracked, right, that her citizen could come into question even 20 years later, was definitely a chip on my shoulder.
The concern came after President Trump signed an executive order seeking to limit birthright citizenship.
One less thing to worry about.
Tuesday, the Supreme Court rejected that effort, reaffirming the 14th Amendment that states children born in the United States are U.S. citizens. UNLV Immigration Clinic Director Michael Kagan tells me this settles the legal question.
The bottom line from today is that birthright citizenship is what we always thought it was. The Constitution said what it said. If you're born in the United States, you're an American.
The ACLU was among the groups that challenged Trump's executive order in court, eventually helping bring the case before the Supreme Court. I spoke with the executive director of the ACLU of Nevada, Attar Hazebullah, who tells me the decision is a reminder the Constitution is considered the supreme law of the land.
The decision's an important one because it at least provides some layer of hope that when we challenge these types of abuses, there are courts that are willing to do the right thing in certain instances.
Peña tells me this means one less fear inside her classroom.
We just want to, teach kids, to strive, right? To know that there's a bright future ahead for them.
Now, while the Supreme Court reaffirmed birthright citizenship today, the decision was not unanimous. 3 justices dissented. Something Attar tells me is a reminder that the debate over immigration and birthright citizenship is far from over.
And President Trump reacting to the Supreme Court's decision on Truth Social today, saying it's, quote, "too bad for our country, but we can easily make it up in Congress through legislation." He added, quote, "no long and unwieldy constitutional amendment is necessary." And the Supreme Court also dropped rulings on other big-ticket cases, including transgender sports bans and caps on campaign spending. We'll dig into those decisions coming up later on Fox 5.